よしみんなそろそろ出発の時間だ遊びに来たんじゃないんだぞ
Before we begin, a shameless self-plug. Save 10% on any of your games using code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg to buy your Eshop vouchers. Have you ever taken a drink of something, expecting one flavour and getting something completely different? Like you think you're drinking a glass of water, but it's lemonade. It messes your head up for a bit and it makes you almost feel like it's not a pleasant taste because it's not what you expected. That is exactly my experience so far with Digimon Survive. I hadn't looked at any information about the game pre-release and I was convinced it was going to be a survival game with Digimon in it, and it's nothing like that, and I aim to tell you exactly what it is like. Thanks to Bandai Namco for the review copy. We will have a full and in-depth review of this one in about a week's time, but this should hopefully tide you over if you're planning on making a decision. Hopefully you know, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. What on earth is Digimon Survive? Well, let's find out.
私はこの地域に伝わる獣神信仰を研究している。
The narrative starts with a group of school friends who have been taken to a remote region for some extracurricular activity. No, not that, you dirty sod. It's more like a bit of a school trip. You play as Takuma, who's joined by Aoi, Minoru, Ryu, Saki, Shuji, Miyu, and Kaito. I apologise, my pronunciation is appalling. And a great deal of the interaction plays out a bit like a visual novel. You can move your cursor around the screen or use the R bumper buttons to quickly switch between them, and important story progressing dialogue will be marked with a red exclamation mark. Through the story you'll find a number of different choices to make, and these will affect your affinity with your party, but also the morale of your group. Stick with me because it's not all visual novel. After a particularly lengthy prelude which sees your companions and yourself venturing further into the forest to have a look around, only to find yourself separated and facing some unusual creatures. Now, as far as spoilers go, well, obviously telling you that they find Digimon shouldn't be too much of a spoiler, but I will keep the circumstances surrounding this a bit more opaque. What I can say though is that the story takes on a much more unsettling tone than I'd expected, and while it would be a stretch to call it scary, it's certainly suspenseful, and it features ghosts, haunted schools, and some quite horrific moments. What it's done well so far though is to shift balance. It will go from something quite scary to something light-hearted, and already through the writing and the Japanese dialogue, there have been some laugh-out-loud moments. Now, the whole thing isn't just a visual novel. As you'd expect, you'll get to fight and train your Digimon, but due to its visual novel nature, you're generally given one area where you can fight against monsters to level up and train, and then through the map on your phone, you can move to other adjacent areas as well. Now, the camera on your phone also acts as a monster detector of sorts, but just be aware, if you're going for this, then there's a huge amount of exposition. So, for example, in the first 3 hours, there were only 3 fights. It's visual novel and storytelling first, battling second. At least at the beginning, and now it's beginning to ramp up. During battles, you'll be able to deploy any of your current Digimon, and they're tactical turn-based fights. Your character has a health bar and a SP bar. If they're adjacent to each other or within a certain proximity, there's a chance that they'll be able to perform support abilities. Now, these are outside of your control, but their locations are not. So it's important to keep them close enough together that they may do one of these 3 things. Either a team attack, so increasing the overall damage of the attack that you make. They may encourage each other, improving the damage the other person does, and then finally they might support the other. This will give HP or some other buff. When attacking enemies, you'll also need to think about the direction you're facing when you do so. If you attack them from the side, for example, you may do more damage, and this is where things get a little bit strange. Now, you can talk to the enemies that you're fighting. Through doing so, they'll ask you a series of 3 questions. If you answer in a way that they find pleasing, then it gradually builds your affinity with them to the point where, essentially, you'll have a chance to capture them, or as it's called here, recruit them. This is based on a percentage figure, and if you're successful, then they'll join your party and you can use them in future battles. If you'd rather not recruit them, then you can simply ask them for some items or other objects, and once again, if you're successful, they'll give you something. You might be wondering, how on earth do you know what answers to give? Well, you kinda don't. You have to work it out through repeated fights against that type, or you might just get lucky. It's an unusual system to say the least, but it seems to work well enough. Throughout the story, certain evolutions will take place. And during combat, you can actually choose which evolution you want to use. This will use up some of your SP. Now, based on around about 7 or 8 hours of play, the weighting has been heavily focused on the visual novel elements. There's a great deal of dialogue between your comrades, and for better or worse, that's where Digimon Survive places a large focus. You can move the cursor around to select different people, or as mentioned, just pressing those bumpers will take you to the next important place. And I have found that I tend to end up just looking for the next red exclamation mark rather than thoroughly exploring. There are items to be had if you do so, but I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that mechanic just yet. There's a full inventory system which is based around your mobile phone, and from here you can equip different items to your Digimon and also browse through your maps and other important information. The game can be saved at any time, but it auto saves regularly. If you remember what I said at the start about taking a sip and just not getting the flavour that I expected, that's exactly what I've found, and I've almost had to turn my thinking around to what Digimon Survive actually is. As I've done that, I've begun to really enjoy its visual novel aspects, and the writing's very funny. It's also fully voice acted in Japanese, and as far as I can tell, they do a good enough job, although it does get a bit squeaky from time to time. That's almost part and parcel at this stage. There has been some excellent music, and I can't quite work out the visual style. During battles, it takes on an isometric view where you can rotate the camera, but the characters themselves seem to be 2D, but I'm not sure. The environments as well outside of battle look like they combine 2D and 3D elements, as in the characters are 2D facing the camera against three-dimensional backgrounds, and I'm reasonably surprised they went for the Unity engine, but it's not a game that needs higher frame rates, and that's probably for the best, because on Switch Unity isn't exactly, well, I think I could probably say that about pretty much any engine at this point. It can look nice though, and the art direction's okay. Again, just not really what I was expecting. Digimon Survive Month 1 edition is £44.99, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm slightly confused what Month 1 edition means, so you're gonna have to help me out with that one in the comments.
気絶してたのってどれくらいかな
But as I say, once we've 100%ed this one, we'll give you a full and in-depth review of it, how it pans out, whether the features that I've spoken about are fleshed out enough to be fully enjoyable. Obviously, I can't rate the game yet, I'm only about 8 hours into it, but my current status, I think I'm slightly confused. Based on the length of the prelude though, I'm only just scratching the surface, so I'd expect that tactical turn-based combat to ramp up in frequency, and I did enjoy the first boss. If you've got any specific questions about the game, then please do pop them down in the comments, and I'll stick around for the first hour or two after release of this video, just answering questions. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this has given you some idea of how the game plays out, and thanks to our patrons as well for supporting the channel. Remember, if you buy any games on Switch, use code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg to save 10% on your eShop credit. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch Up. Cheers guys, see ya!